Hello, how's everybody doing today? This is Mickey. Well, today we're going to go over some dodging and burning techniques in Lightroom using the masking brush and the radial gradient. Now we're going to use other masking techniques when we do this, when we do process this photograph, but primarily it's going to be the brush and the radial gradient. This is the photograph that I took on the Ring of Kerry in Ireland of Ballinskeg's castle. And while it was a fairly well-lit scene with little gloomy skies, the interior was not as well lit and it had very flat light coming in. Now looking at this picture, you can tell that there's some character to it because the light was so flat, you really don't get a sense of the textures and the depth in this interior of the castle. So that's what we're going to work on today, to try to make this picture pop and bring out the depth and contrast that I found when I first took this photograph. Now before we get started on that, I just want to cover the tools that we're going to be using when we use our masking tools to do our dodging and burning. So let's go to our masking tools and look at the brush. And let me just do a real brief explanation in case anybody's not up to speed with what this brush can do. The first control we see is our size. Very simple. Sliding it back and forth will change the size of your brush. You can use your right bracket key and left bracket key as shortcuts to make the brush smaller or larger. The feather is that edge of the brush. As I increase it, you can see there's an inner ring and an outer ring. The inner ring is where 100% of the change, or we'll call it the paint, goes down on your photograph. From the inner ring to the outer ring, it goes from 100% to 0%. So that's where you hear people saying, I have a hard brush or I have a soft brush. A hard brush would be feather at 0%, or near that lower level, to where you have a very sharp edge, and a soft brush would be where the feather is at 100%, 75 to 100%, and gives you a very soft edge to the brush. And let me show you what that looks like real quick. So if we brush across, when we're at 100% feather, and let's change that to a hard brush down to 0, flow and density at 100%. So as I brush across, we get an area of change that's got very sharp edges to it. And now I'll make our feather 100%, which is a soft brush, and you can see my edges are very soft. So it allows me to get into edges and use the soft edge against other colors without this hard edge intruding while I'm painting. All right. The next is flow, and flow is how much of the paint you're putting down each time you brush across the page. All right, so at 100%, every time I paint across, I'm going to get 100% of the effect at one time. When I have flow set to 50%, all I'm getting is 50% as I brush across. Now I can continue to brush across until I get to 100%, as you can see right there. But the lower the flow, the less amount of change or paint is put down at one time. And with the lower flow, the more control I have to put my changes in place. So you can see I'm just painting right here, and it's putting the flow is low, so it's putting the paint on very slowly, and that lets me build up the effect and not go overboard real rapidly, So remember, flow is how much paint you're putting down at one time. So let's get rid of these masks here. And now let's talk about density. Density is kind of a governor. Density says, I'm only going to let you put down so much of the paint. So even with the flow at 100%, if I have density at 100%, I get 100% all at once when I stroke across the photograph. Now if I set density at 50%, it will only allow the brush to put 50% down. And it doesn't matter how many times I brush across, it's only going to allow 50%. And this is where people get confused between flow and density. When flow is at 50%, it only puts a partial amount down at a time, but I can keep moving back and across and build up to 100%. But if I have my density set lower at 50%, I can brush, and I only get 50% change as I brush across, but I can only build up to 50%. because density is our governor. It will not let us go anything above 50% when that's the setting. All right. The next real important tool with the brush is called Auto Mask, and this allows us to paint changes in. Let's move our flow and our density up 100%. We'll leave our feather down to a really tight brush, and we'll turn Auto Mask on, just on, off, just like this. And what Auto Mask does, it only allows changes to be made by the brush where the plus mark is hovering over. So it's hovering over white. It will only let the paint or change affect the white area. Now, if I move the plus into the blue area, as you can see, it will make changes in the blue, but as long as my mark stays over the blue, it will not intrude into any other color. So you can see here, we'll do the white here, and we'll move over into the orange, and now it colors the orange and not the white. So that's the power of Auto Mask. If you're having to paint real close edges, you can see that we can make changes very easily as long as we keep the center of our brush, the plus mark, in the color that we want to change. All right, let's look at the Radial Gradient real quick. Radial Gradient is in the masking tool under Radial Gradient, your shortcut of Shift M. You click on this and you will get crosshairs. If you hold your mouse button down and drag, it will create a round or oval depending on how you drag. Now, you can change the size of this by hovering over one of the edges and dragging out, dragging up, and you can hover over this and change the orientation. If you want to change everything equilaterally as you move, hold your Shift key down, and as you resize, all the sizes will move equally. If you want to change just one side, you hold your Option key down and it will just move that single side. So with these controls, you can get this to about any shape that you really need that you want to affect. The area that you see in magenta, or it could be any color depending on what you've chosen for your overlay, is the area that will be affected. The red dot in the center is for you to control the feather. And just like the brush, the feather is that soft edge or hard edge that will be affected when you apply your changes. Now, right now, your inner brush will have changes from 100% will be in the center, and then from 100% to 0 will be from the inner circle to the outer circle. So let's put an exposure change in place so we can see that. And as we increase our feather, we get a harder edge. So this would be a hard edge radial gradient, and this would be a soft edge radial gradient. I tend to use the soft edge radial gradient when I'm doing my dodging and burning because it gives us such a nice fine light fall off wherever we put our radial gradient. All right, let's get started on this photograph. Now, if I went kind of fast on the explanation of the masking brush or the radial gradient, I'll put a couple links down below that goes into much more detail if you want more information on those tools. All right, to start out with, we're just going to do some real basic changes. I'm going to bring the exposure up just a little tiny bit and shadows a little bit. I'm going to add some blacks because there is kind of a dark tone to this photograph that I want to keep, and add a little whites. I'm not going to use any texture, dehaze, any of those. I'm going to put all that in masking, and we'll just do the real quick lens correction, and we'll call that done, and we'll go right into our masking. And we're going to start out with what I do with a lot of my photographs. I just want to see where my light and dark areas are because sometimes they're not quite as evident, and to do that I go to the luminance range mask, and I pick just a medium range of luminance, and I move the main window to the center and make the feather sides right in the center there. And to do that, what I want to do is see the dark areas, which is these areas, and the light areas, which are these areas. So I'm just moving my luminance scale from left to right to see what is light. So these are my lights that I need to brighten up or accentuate more, and then these are my dark areas which I want to accentuate or clear up with a little more brightness if there's some details in there. But this just gives me a good idea of the areas that I want to focus on when I'm making my changes. So I'm going to delete the mask, and we're going to start with the very bottom here. And as you can see, we have some dark areas, some light, more dark areas, and these are high points that we probably want to accentuate. I'm going to go into my masking, and I'm going to grab the masking brush, keep my flow at about 30%, feather, mid feather, and 100% density. And we're just going to brush over these areas here where it is dark, and over this area right here. And we're just going to add a little or less exposure, make it just a little darker. So we're going to lower the exposure, and I'm going to lower shadows a little bit. I might bring in whites just to give it a little extra bump, and blacks. And then we have our amount slider. Anytime we use a mask, we have an amount slider to make those changes exactly like we like. Okay, I like that there. And now I'm going to add another mask, and to create a brand new mask that is the same type you were just using, you can hit the N key. When you do that, you see we have a new mask. It's a new mask brush, and now I'm going to brush in this area of the walkway, or what I think was the walkway inside the castle entrance here, and fill that all in. And in this area, we're going to lighten it up just a little bit. Not a whole lot, just a little bit, so we have some contrast between these higher areas and this area. And I might just give it just a little touch of golden, about like that. Now I'm going to just put a little area of interest in the walkway. I'm going to use a radial gradient, and I'm going to make a very small gradient, about like this, right in the center of the walkway. And we just want to add just an area of interest. And to do that, we're just going to put a little bit of exposure, about like this. Let's make it a little bigger. Maybe use our shadows to bring it up a little bit. So as you can see, it just really adds just a little highlight in there that makes the picture a little more interesting. So looking at our mask so far, this is what we've done, which is a pretty big change for just a couple masks that we've put in place. The next thing I want to do, I want to zoom in a little bit, and I don't want to make the scene busy, but these rocks have some interesting features to it, and they're actually a part of the floor of the castle, and I think they need to be brought out just a little bit. We don't want to go crazy with them, but I think it would be a good thing to add a little exposure to them. So I'm just going to paint, just randomly grab some of these rocks, and I'm using a brush to paint over the areas that obviously have been exposed to some light. Doesn't have to be exact. You can turn your auto mask on if you want to help you stay in the lines. But if you just take a little time to color in just the surface of the rocks that are exposed to light. And like I said, we don't want to go too crazy with it because it'll be a distraction. But I think with a little bit, it adds some quality to the floor of the castle. Alright, so now that we have all our masks in place, now we can add a little exposure, about like this, not too much, and maybe just a tad bit of color, about like this. Now let's zoom back out, and we'll look at this before and after, before and after, before and after. Alright, now we want to address the light that's coming into these windows, or the doorway and the windows here. I'll zoom in just a little bit. And I'm going to use a brush, and I'm just going to brush in this area here that the light enters in. And I'm just focusing on the wall here. We don't need auto mask on. We can do all this by hand. I make a brush a little bit bigger, about like this, so we don't have to draw so many lines. And what we're going to do here is that we're going to brighten up this area, and we're going to use an intersection with a linear gradient to make it look like light is coming in and fades off as light comes in. So right now doing this, it doesn't really give us a realistic look of what light looks like coming in here. So we'll go to intersect with a linear gradient, And we'll draw our linear gradient here. We'll turn our overlay on, and that would be clicking on Show Overlay or hitting the O key. And that way we can see where the light is hitting this area. So we can stretch this out because we want the light to be more on the front end where it comes in through the window, and then less as it comes through the window on the walls. Alright, once we get it in place, we can add a little light through exposure and shadows like this, and again we have our amount slider if we really want to brighten it up a little bit more. And then once we have it in place, we'll hit the O key to turn the overlay off. So we can see exactly where we want the light to fall. I think that looks good, about like that. And then I also want to add a little clarity because these walls were kind of a little damp, so I want a little reflection as if there's water in this area so we could see it a little better. Alright, so now let's concentrate on up here. I don't think we need to use the linear gradient as an intersect. I think we can just use a brush and just paint in this area. Let's turn the overlay off so we can see exactly what we're getting here. We'll turn the exposure up, and I want to hit this area up here. Like I said, we have the flow set at 25%, so I can keep painting till I get it just the level of exposure that I want. So if I want a lot, I just keep stroking across the area. If I don't want a lot, then just a little bit. We can come down here using the same brush and brighten this up just a little bit, right in this area. Build it up. Since it's only at 20%, we can build it up by just keep brushing across the area, about like this. And if we wanted to add a little color to it, we can do that, just like that. Okay, so now I want to just put generally some dark and light areas out on these walls. We can see there's light here, there's light here, there's light here, and then some darkness. So we're going to start out with a brush with an increase in exposure, about like this. Again, flow at about 25%, and since this is a bright area, we're just going to lightly once or twice brush over these light areas like this, right here, a little bit here, and just maybe a really light brush in this area, and then right across here. So as we can see, we've introduced just a little light in those areas that were already bright. Now we're going to do just the opposite. We're going to grab another brush. This time we're going to take the exposure down, and we're going to start hitting those areas that need less light, like this area right here. Maybe a little bit in this area right here. Maybe a little up here. Now I see I want some more light here, so I can go back to my lights mask, which is mask number 7, and I can hit a little bit area in here and hit this area right here because it's kind of a little bright as it comes into the room right there. So if we look at our brights and we look at our darks, we have some good contrast that we're building up. This needs a little bit more of the darks. And if you can't remember, you can always go up here and just call this darks, and we'll call this lights, and that way you don't pick the wrong one and start painting in what you don't need. Alright, now I want to look at our grasses and greens up here. You can tell that some of the golden areas in this grass and this area right here have highlights to them, and the rest are we'll make a little green and a little darker. So I'm going to make a new brush. I'm going to increase the exposure. Again, I'm going to keep my flow and density about the same. I'm going to zoom in so I can see this a little better. And make my brush size a little smaller, and I want to start hitting these areas right in here like this. As you can see, we're just brightening them up just a little bit, because this is where the whatever sun was left out there, it is coming in through the opening in the roof here, and it is highlighting this grass that is growing on the sides of the walls and the roof. So we'll just take a little time and hit all these areas in here, and we'll come back with a green brush to take a look at some of the green areas that need highlighting or exposure changes. Okay, so now if we turn our brush up real high, we can see what we did, and then let's add a little golden to it, about like this. And if we look at before, after, just real subtle changes that make this pop, that give us some depth to this vegetation in the area. So now let's make another brush, and we're going to make this our greens. So we are going to make it a little darker, and we're going to make it just a little greener, and I'm going to throw just a little gold in there too. And now I just want to start hitting these areas. We just want to darken them down just a little bit to add some contrast to that gold that was in there. Like right here in this area, right along the top of this golden grass here, maybe some of this up here. And just scroll down, and we want to look at this area right in here and make it a little darker. I'm going to go back to my brights on my golds, and I forgot to hit this down here, so let's hit this area. You can tell these are highlights because you can see there's a lot more light hitting them than the vegetation up above them. Right over here. And then we can go back to the darks and hit some of these areas right here like this. So we have good contrast changes between the two. So if we look at before, after, and after, we have nice contrast between our light goldens and our dark greens that give it just a little more depth as we look at the picture. So let's look at overall what changes we have. So this is before, and after. Now I call it micro changes. What I do is I zoom in, and we can see we have lights here. So I'm going to grab my brush, I'm going to make it a lot smaller. I mean a little more flow and a little smaller brush, and we're going to increase the exposure. Like I said, this is what I call like micro dodging and micro burning, because we're just getting into really the small edges of these rocks. But you know, it doesn't look like much here, but overall when we start to take a look at this in the grand scheme of things, it does make a big difference when we start hitting these specific areas. Right, so if we look at this before, and after. And then we could also grab a brush and decrease the exposure and hit some other areas near the light areas to add more contrast. Don't want to go too dark because we'll just take away all the contrast by making everything just too dark. But get in these cracks, you know, where it is dark, so we can see the light a little better that we had just put in. We can go over here and do the same thing. Let's go back to our lights brush, which was mask 9. Just start hitting some of these bright rocks like this on the edges, the leading edges that are exposed to the sun. So it adds more contrast to these rock edges. looks like this. So if we look before and after now on these, before, and after. Now let's zoom out. I'm going to grab another brush here, and we're going to make an increase in exposure. And I'm doing that. I'm not going to use the same brush I used up here because I need different light. And if I use the same brush, I'm stuck with whatever exposure settings I had in the prior brush that I used. And I just want to come in here and hit some of these rocks that obviously are lighter than the surrounding rocks, and give a little contrast in here too. Maybe a little bit down here, a little bit over here. And if you notice, we'd hit this area with other light before, but now we're just refining it a little more. We had like a big change to get it where we wanted, and then we can start making these little changes that gives us the light that we want on these areas of the rock. All right, so let's look at our before, after, before, and after. We have a lot of good contrast changes. A lot of things are brought out with the light that we've put in place. At this point, I would probably take a look at one of our global settings. Let's look at our contrast. We might be able to do something with that under the basic panel. Let's just see what a contrast change does. It's just a little too much because we're hitting it globally. So my next task would be go to the tone curve, and we want this luminance range here, and let's look and see what we can do here with just a mild S curve. It is brightening it up in a nice way. Don't want too much change in the darks down here. That looks good, about just like that. And then I might look at my effects globally and see what clarity is doing. I like negative clarity in some of this. It kind of adds a glow. You see some glow here. We could even look at dehaze and see if that's helping. The dehaze is kind of hitting the sky too much. I mean, we could put a mask over that. So I don't really want to do that. Let's just stick with our clarity about like this and add a little texture to take the fuzz off the edges that the clarity is putting in there. So let's take a look and see what that does. That's making it look really good. And now let's go down to effects, and we're going to put just a light vignette in place. So we're going to bring the edges down just a little bit, and then we're going to grab our midpoint and we're going to bring that up so we don't have so much dark around the edges, and we're going to bring up the feather a little bit. So now if we look at this before and after, before, after, before, and after. Looks like we could do a little bit with our window there. It looks like we're getting a little too much light in, so we could throw a radial gradient right here and just take the highlights down just a little bit, not too much, about like this. See how that looks. Yeah, it does. Looks a little better. So here's our finished product here with our masking before, after, and after, and overall the picture with our basic changes at before, after, before, and after. And then there's probably one other thing I would probably try, and I use like a sunlight filter. You can get that in On One or in Nik. I actually made a brush that I could use when I'm using a mask. So I could say brush, and come down here to brush presets, and I have one that I called Bring in the Sun, and this is a brush filter that I just made myself, and we could set the flow down really low, about like this, and then I'll make a really big brush, and I'll just lightly brush over like this, and it brings a little sun effect in, as you can see. Before, after, before, and after. I might take that down with the amount slider just a little bit. It kind of adds a little brightness to it and a little color. Before, after, and after. And as you can see, with the masking changes we put in place, nothing major, just hitting where all the parts of the light were coming in and where there was dark, and adding some contrast here on the floor and brightening up our yellows and darkening our greens and adding a little color to some of the rocks. We did a really good job of adding a little depth to this photograph. I used some negative clarity so we could give it more ethereal effect, which is something I prefer. I know a lot of people don't, but it's just something I like to do. And then finally, using like a sunshine filter or a sunshine brush to lightly brush over to make everything just give a little tiny glow to it and make it look a little nicer. Well, there you have it. I know it ran a little long, but I just wanted to go through the whole process of using the masks, brush and radial gradients to dodge and burn and just bring out the features of this photograph that was rather flat when I first took it, but now it has a lot more pop to it and a lot more depth. If anybody has any questions about this and needs further help or further explanation, please let me know and I'll be glad to help out. And I can't wait to talk to you again soon.